Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Sutter, and I'm the CEO of the U.S. Soybean Export Council. My team and I are very excited to be with you virtually today for the USSEC Global Conference. We're going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the global aquaculture production and supply chain. We appreciate you all taking time out of your day to spend with us. While all of our lives have been greatly impacted, we're fortunate that technology allows us to continue dialogue with you, no matter where you are in the world. We hope that you and your family are staying safe and that you find today's presentations worthwhile. Before we jump into today's agenda, I wanted to share some background on USSEC's aquaculture program. USSEC's had an active program in aquaculture for 35 years, with partners ranging from small family fish farms in Asia to large international operations. No matter who we're working with, our top priority is to optimize and demonstrate the value of U.S. soy as we help bring the latest in best practices and technology to those in the aquaculture industry. Since we began, we've consistently evolved the program to create better, feed-based approaches that use U.S. soy. We do this through four main focus areas: feed, technology advancements, aquaculture investment, and most recently, sustainability. Through these focus areas, we've provided critical training and technical knowledge for the global aquaculture community, and we've always prioritized innovation and adaptability in order to better serve our customers and meet the needs within the seafood industry. The COVID-19 pandemic is a huge global event. It's significantly impacting on almost every business in the world today. But the closure of many restaurants, food services, and other major users of seafood has severely impacted producers. This has changed seafood sales and consumption in the short term, but there will also be longer-term impacts which will be felt across the industry. We hope that the sessions today provide you with better insights into these short and long-term impacts on aquaculture. We have strong speakers from across the industry that will provide the most up-to-date research and facts that will hopefully provide you with some insight and assurance during this time. As I've gotten to learn more about the aquaculture industry over the last few years, I am so impressed with the entrepreneurs and the companies involved in what is now the fastest growing animal protein business worldwide. We're fortunate today to have George Chamberlain, the president of the Global Aquaculture Alliance, talking with us today about the impact of COVID-19 on global aquaculture production. We are also fortunate to have Horian Nikolic, a senior global specialist in seafood for Rabo Research Food and Agribusiness, joining us to discuss the commercial marketing of global aquaculture products. Thanks to both of these global experts for taking the time to join us. You will also hear from Carlos Salinas, Senior Director, Soybean Meal for USSEC. Carlos recently joined our team after a great career in grain export and processing. Carlos's role at USSEC includes guiding the marketing, promotion, messaging, and work strategies for our soybean meal focus area, of which aquaculture is a key part. We're happy to have his expertise on our team. So while we continue to be surrounded by uncertainty, know that our teams at USSEC are committed to providing high-quality programs to our friends and customers around the world, as well as ensuring access to a continuous stream of sustainably produced, nutritious U.S. soy provided by U.S. growers and our great export supply chain. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items to cover that will guide you on how to interact with today's presentations. First, both sessions will be identical. The same session will be conducted to make it as convenient as possible for all time zones. There's only a need to attend one session, but of course, if you choose to, you're welcome to attend both. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, simply type your question in the Q&A widget down in the console. Make sure that all questions are submitted in this Q&A widget, as we'll be monitoring that, and we'll make sure that the questions get queued up and we get as many answered as possible. If you should lose audio or video at any time, just refresh your browser. That seems to help. If you need further technical assistance, you can enter your issue in the Q&A widget and somebody will get back to you. Finally, during our speakers' presentations, you'll be able to view their PowerPoints up close on your individual screens. If you choose to do so, the presentations will also be available under the handout button of the webcast screen. The handout button is the center button at the bottom of the console. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our chairman, the chairman of USSEC, Mr. Monty Peterson, who will start today's session.
Hello, I'm Monty Peterson. I'm a fourth-generation soybean farmer in North Dakota, and I currently serve as chairman for USSEC's board. I'm also director on the American Soybean Association board. Thank you for joining us today. At past events in the U.S. and abroad, I've spent a good portion of my time meeting with international buyers face-to-face. And during farm visits, I've even had the opportunity to give buyers a direct look at our product and how it is produced. Today is a bit different as we are meeting virtually, but I'm grateful for this technology that allows us to meet with you, our customers, and continue to learn more about how U.S. soy can meet your aquaculture needs. But before I begin, let me first express that our entire team extends our thoughts to all of you, hoping that you and your families and loved ones are well in light of the recent COVID-19 events. Today, we're here to share an important story with you. Despite facing a public health issue and much global uncertainty, our farmers' commitment to producing safe and reliable soybean meal for aquaculture has never wavered. The last few years have been some of the most challenging on record, but farmers maintain their commitment to doing everything they can to provide soy for food, fiber, fuel, and other products. The same applies for COVID-19, but we're resilient and moving forward. Aquaculture was recognized as critical infrastructure by the U.S. government, and farmers intend to honor that through their work, proceeding with planting for the 2020 harvest, focused on being a reliable supplier to our customers. Soybean farmers intend to serve as an example to others by continuing our work safely, sustainably, and effectively. U.S. soybean farmers are an example to others of how to keep their noses to the grindstone and stick to doing what they do best, even in the most trying times. U.S. soybean farmers are continuing to produce a high-quality, sustainable, and reliable crop, and our soybean value chain is working diligently to ensure that exports continue to flow through the system and to you, our customers. U.S. soybean farmers greatly value the relationships we have with you, our partners. And as we head into our planting and harvest seasons, we are ready and able to deliver the consistent and high-quality product you want. We take our responsibility to help feed the world very seriously. As Jim mentioned, the U.S. Soybean Export Council's Aquaculture program has been around for 35 years. As a farmer myself, it's been an assuring experience to watch aquaculture's growth through the years. We're always looking for new, innovative ways to use our product around the world that meets needs. As the global population increases, the demand for seafood and fish will continue to grow. And by 2030, 62% of all seafood produced for human consumption will be a product of aquaculture. And the industry's need for high-quality, renewable protein product like U.S. soybean meal will be critical to the future of the global aquaculture field. U.S. farmers around the country are ready and willing to meet that demand. With the help of U.S. soy, expanding feed-based aquaculture can address the needs of both supply and demand. Our soybean farmers provide a consistent, healthy, and efficient source of protein that nourishes the fish that feed families around the world. U.S. soybean farmers are an essential partner in the prosperity of the aquaculture community and are helping to revolutionize aquaculture globally. The value of our partnerships is immeasurable and something that helps differentiate the U.S. soy advantage for our customers. By hosting events like this one, We can learn directly about your biggest challenges and address any concerns. To me, it's clear that collaboration is the best way to make things happen. That's true whether you're working with your peers on the next farm over or on another continent. And as we move ahead into 2020 and beyond, our goal in the U.S. is to continue to make your partnership, our partnership, even stronger and remain a consistent supplier to your industry and your customers. We hope you enjoyed today's session on our first speaker, George Chamberlain, President of the Global Aquaculture Alliance.
Hello, my name is George Chamberlain. I'm with the Global Aquaculture Alliance, and it's my pleasure to speak to you today about the impact of COVID-19 on aquaculture. Let's begin with the human toll. It's tragic that we've already had 4 million people around the world infected and 280,000 deaths. 2/3 of the countries in the world are in varying stages of lockdowns, curfews, movement controls, restrictions on foreign travel, and some countries and regions within countries are doing much better and others much worse than the average. It's a very difficult time, but restrictions are beginning to be relaxed and life is beginning to turn somewhat back to normal. Let's think about the impacts on the major seafood markets. In the U.S., there have been 1.3 million people infected and 79,000 deaths. Just to put that in perspective, that's about 1/3 of the global infections, yet the U.S. only has 5% of the global population. So we're having a much worse time of it than other countries. Unemployment in the U.S. is at a record high of 33 million people, which is 14.7% unemployment. But states are already beginning a trial and error phase of reopening according to varying timelines and guidelines that differ among states according to the risks that each one has. Canada is following a similar pattern with their provinces opening at different rates. So it's a very fluid and very tense situation. In China, the GDP growth in the first quarter dropped from what would normally be 6% to minus 6.8%. But China has recovered very quickly. Restaurants are now open, although at about 60% capacity. Domestic travel is cautiously starting, but foreign visitors are still prohibited. Japan extended its state of emergency until the end of May, and foreign visitors are still prohibited from entry. In the EU and UK, the situation varies depending on the nation. In the UK, it is still in full lockdown. In the EU, Germany and Austria are probably the most advanced in reopening, but travel is restricted throughout the continent. Looking forward, we don't expect life to return to normal anytime soon, because that would require herd immunity where the majority of the population is immune to COVID-19. So social distancing must continue until a vaccine is available, which is expected to take 18 to 24 months. And during this time period, we have to be prepared for secondary outbreaks around the world. For example, just today we heard that Wuhan, China, had some additional infections. This is likely to occur over and over again over the next couple of years. It's important to note that COVID-19 does not infect seafood itself, but it has many, many impacts, indirect impacts on the seafood sector. One of the primary impacts is the market channel. With the closure of the food service sector, which is restaurants, catering, hotels, which previously had been the major source of seafood consumption, especially in the United States, and the closure of wet markets, which have been important, especially in Asia. This led to a great increase in seafood consumption at retail and through e-commerce. One of the positives that we'll talk a little bit more about later in this presentation is the tremendous transformation this is causing in Asia, where live and fresh fish are normally bought in wet markets, and now they're increasingly purchased at retail and through e-commerce. There's also been a major impact on logistics. At the local level, movement controls have prevented workers from getting to their jobs. This has slowed down nearly every business around the world. Internationally, air travel is essentially shut down, and that loss of passenger air travel has resulted in much reduced air freight capacity and greatly increased air freight prices, which have impacted species like lobster, salmon, sea bass and sea bream, and tilapia. So now we're having situations where premium fish are ready for harvest for the fresh export market, but there's no market to receive them, and the fish are simply too expensive or the inappropriate species for domestic sale. Another major impact has been on worker safety, which is mainly a problem in processing plants. We first saw this with meat packing plants, especially in the US, where poultry and meat packing is a highly consolidated business, and large numbers of workers are placed shoulder to shoulder along conveyor belts and very vulnerable to COVID-19. And inevitably, there were outbreaks within plants. Those individuals inadvertently transferred the disease to the community, causing major health problems, and those plants were shut down. This created such a food supply problem with poultry and beef that President Trump signed an executive order to reopen those plants. Well, similar issues have occurred at seafood processing plants around the world, but to a lesser degree. And seafood processing plants are reacting for the health of their workers and for the community by implementing enhanced sanitary controls. This includes things like screening with temperature checks of workers, interviewing workers as they arrive to make sure they're not ill and they haven't been traveling, banning visitors, increased personal protective equipment, greater social distancing among workers, which can involve fewer workers but more shifts during the day. And looking at the right of the screen, you see a graphic developed by OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the CDC, the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, showing the typical scenario at the upper part of the screen, showing 4 workers, 2 of them side by side and the other 2 across the conveyor belt, that are not far enough apart. And the alternatives are, instead of 4 workers, to just have 2 and separate them by at least 6 feet or 2 meters. Even better would be to have those 2 with a physical barrier between them. And then another alternative is to have all 4 and have 2 physical barriers, 1 down the length of the conveyor belt and 1 separating the workers in the other dimension. I'd like to now switch to the production sector and begin with China, the world's largest aquaculture producer that produced 51 million metric tons of aquaculture products in 2019. Here you see a list of the top 10 freshwater species, and you see that it's dominated by various species of carp and tilapia. The species mix is changing. China is shifting from low-value species like common carp, silver carp, and bighead carp to high-value species like largemouth bass, catfish, and mandarin fish. And the government is also pressing for greater environmental controls, and it is steadily removing cage systems from many of the lakes and reservoirs where they're causing too much eutrophication, too much waste deposition into those water bodies. The U.S. Soybean Export Council has introduced an alternative to produce large volumes of fish, but with low environmental impact, using what is called an in-pond raceway system. And you see pictures of it here. That has increased from 3 demonstration cells as a pilot in 2013 to over 6,000 of those units in 2019. Now, one of the advantages of the IPRS, the in-pond raceway system, is that fish are raised at high density in raceways, which receive a continuous flow of water from the main receiving body, for example, a lake. But at the end of the raceways is a sedimentation channel where all of the solid waste and uneaten feed accumulates before the water returns into the receiving water body. And there's actually a moving vacuum that sucks up that solid waste and deposits it into that inclined sluice that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. So it's a very innovative and creative way of preventing the pollution of lakes and streams by removing the waste before it enters. Going back to the impact of COVID on China's freshwater fish production, in that period where the peak outbreak occurred in China during January to March, there was a strong reduction in sale of fish. And in fact, in some areas, the reduction was 90 or 95% down from normal. But now transport and logistics have returned to normal. Stocking has been somewhat delayed by about 2 weeks, and the logistical issues have caused some increased feed prices. So the cost of fish production is going to be somewhat higher, but freshwater fish prices are also higher. And for example, about 20% higher for grass carp. So the freshwater fish production in China will come through okay. There's a similar situation with freshwater fish throughout Asia. Almost every country has similar challenges and similar outcomes. One of the very big changes in China, as I mentioned early in the presentation, is the shift from traditional wet markets to retail and e-commerce. Here you see photos of traditional wet markets where fish and crustaceans and bivalves are held live in aerated water or fresh on ice. And this allows the Asian consumers to inspect and select the fish that they prefer, the seafood they prefer. But now that those are closed, the market is shifting to retail, and here you see beautiful fish processed. They can either be whole or gilled and gutted, or large fish like grass carp can be sectioned. For example, a consumer may wish to just buy the head of a grass carp for soup, for example. And there's also very efficient delivery services, both from retail to the consumer and e-commerce to the consumer. Here you see motorbikes with insulated containers carrying the seafood to the consumer. Let me draw your attention to one of the latest concepts in China. Alibaba, one of the very big players in e-commerce, has introduced a new retail concept. It's pronounced Huma. And you can find a link to it at the bottom of this photograph. And I would highly recommend watching it because it's as if you're being transported into the future to see how retail might work years from now. But actually, there are already 65 of these Huma retail outlets in China. They basically are connecting the retail experience with their online e-commerce app, which connects the user to the full provenance of every product just by scanning the barcode on any particular product listing as they walk around the store. There's a restaurant where the products are delivered by robot to the consumer. There also workers are fulfilling orders and delivering them to consumers at the same time as others are shopping. And they can deliver to customers within 3 kilometers within 30 minutes of the order. And of course, checkout is automatic. There will be no cashiers. It's a fascinating concept. One of the other main producers of freshwater fish is Egypt, where Egyptians actually prefer tilapia more than chicken. With the live markets being closed, freshwater fish consumption in Egypt has dropped somewhat, but it's essentially stable because it's a very important staple product. However, fisheries landings have dropped dramatically, probably 50%, and prices have also dropped because, once again, those high-value marine fish rely on fresh markets and export markets, and especially in the food service sector. And the same, unfortunately, has happened in Greece and Turkey with the sea bass and sea bream business, where because of lack of fresh food service markets, they've lost a major part of their market share and are really suffering. Trout, on the other hand, in Turkey is still doing okay, maybe only a 10 or 15% drop. On the shrimp side, the new concerns in China are two diseases, one called DIV1, which is decapod iridescent virus 1 in the Pearl River Delta. That's actually a recurring disease, but one that we're keeping an eye on. And then a brand new one that causes post-larval shrimp to appear glass-like and with high mortality in the hatchery. And this has tentatively been called HPTV, or hepatopancreatic translucence virus. And we expect a couple of new publications on that disease to come out in the next few weeks. On the positive side, there's a resurgence of black tiger shrimp in China, and it's doing quite well. In Vietnam, the shrimp farming business is in the south of the country where there are very few COVID problems, and it's operating almost as normal, with hatcheries up to about 70% capacity now, and an increasing use of intensive tank farms. In India and Ecuador, the scenario was almost the same. In March with COVID, farmers tended to panic and sell their product as quickly as possible, which caused low prices and was difficult for packing plants to handle because both India and Ecuador were only at about 40% capacity in the processing plants due to lack of workers. And India also has the unique problem of having broodstock limitations because shipments from Hawaii are limited by lack of air freight. Now let's wrap up with near-term, midterm, and long-term expectations. First of all, the challenge. Consumer budgets are expected to be tight with all the unemployment, so expensive seafood items may suffer. On the other hand, Asian customers are learning that fresh fish from retail and e-commerce is just as good and even more convenient than live fish from the wet market. Western consumers are learning to prepare seafood at home. Eventually, when food service opens again, total consumption should be even higher. And there's a greater awareness of biosecurity throughout the aquaculture world, which is important considering that disease is the #1 issue in aquaculture. In the midterm, we expect some positive benefits from this COVID technology boom. There's improvements in diagnostic technology, rapid diagnostics, vaccines, and much improved communications tools like this one that we're enjoying now. On the processing side, as we mentioned, there are food safety issues, and there's a need for greater investment in processing mechanization to improve worker health and safety. And then long term, we can expect the tailwinds of these mega trends in, for example, global population increase and much greater food demand in the future, 30 to 50% higher protein demand, which cannot be met by scaling today's food systems. There are just too many sustainability issues and climate change issues. New systems are required. Plus, the types of food that we're eating are causing obesity, heart disease, and other diet-related problems. Aquaculture is well positioned to address these challenges with healthy foods produced from environmentally and socially responsible systems. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, George. Those were very thought-provoking comments. I can picture a robot moving through a restaurant and those sort of things. Very interesting. So next we have Rebound who will here to discuss with us COVID-19 impact on global aquaculture commercial marketing of aquaculture products. Look forward to hearing what he has to say. Go ahead, Rebound.
Hi everyone, so today I'm going to speak about salmon and shrimp aquaculture. I'll give you a quick update. My name is Goran Nikolic, I work for Rebound Group. Rebound is a bank that started, I believe, 1890s in the Netherlands, founded by farmers, but since then it has grown into a global agricultural lender. And as such, we're also a lender to the salmonid and shrimp farming industries globally. You can see on this page all the offices that we have worldwide. So continuing forward, let's get into the salmon situation. The way the structure of this presentation is that I'll first talk a little bit about how the sector was before Corona and then during, and then I'll try to have a view on the midterm outlook. So the salmon aquaculture industry was in a good place before Corona struck. We were basically enjoying what we call a long-term high price scenario starting somewhere around 2016. That's when there was an algae outbreak in Chile, prices adjusted up, but supply could never really keep up with demand. So if you look at Norwegian prices, we were thinking about a new normal, which was around 60 NOK per kilogram, which was very profitable for the industry. Then if you look at, let's say, the supply outlook, this picture shows you what the current expectations are, around 2% growth in 2020, about 1.9% growth in 2021. Actually, we only dropped these slightly after Corona, maybe about 1.5% was the only ability for the industry to reduce supply. So we were already expecting very tight supply in an industry that was already having a high price point. So a good way to enter a difficult time. We talk to the industry on a day-to-day basis, and I would like to kind of give you a quick review of what are all the things that have happened before we get into some of the data points, which are mostly prices. So, I mean, as everybody knows, it's the food service that really hurt the salmon industry, as any really seafood industry. In the US especially. So in US, the consumption at food service level is maybe 40 to 50%. It's somewhat less in Europe, perhaps 30%. So when the demand dropped at food service and it grew at food retail, the net loss is the most significant in the US. And this is really the main driver of the price drop and the main pain point for the industry. If you think about logistics and labor, some things that we hear a lot about in other sectors, I would say the salmonid industry probably somewhat less impacted. At farming level, the impact is minimal. There are some issues at processing level. That's where most people are employed. We did hear about some plants that had to be closed in Chile, and perhaps in some weeks capacity was reduced by maybe as much as 30%. But overall, it was fairly limited amount of absenteeism and a limited impact on the overall industry from a labor and logistics point of view. Bottom line, if we start with the conclusion of this presentation, is that in the salmon sector, we're going to have some losses primarily due to a low price point, but production and volumes have not been impacted that much. And we do expect a recovery before the end of this year, at least in prices. So let's see what are some of the different price points that we are observing here. This is a Oslo market where you have a large trade of fish, fresh fish products. One of the things you see is this blue line is the 2020 drop in prices. It's quite significant in NOK terms, really falling from almost 80 to slightly above 50 NOK. We are now stable around 53 NOK. The second thing you see is that actually exports per week are hardly different than last year, almost the same. When we see where they're going, there's been a marked recovery already of China for quite a few weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. You see it here in the right corner. Also, even Italy reached the bottom and recovered. And this is the main market in the EU, fairly stable at 80% of Norwegian exports. And here's really where retail has really come strong and delivered demand. One of the very important things why European retail demand has been so strong is because at the same time as the salmon prices came down, the NOK also depreciated. So the price in euro is even lower. Actually, it has dropped from 8 to 4. You almost a 50% drop. So you're getting a major discount on the salmon in Europe at retail due to the major depreciation of the NOK, which in turn is related to the oil prices. So with this kind of low prices, I think we should expect very good retail demand of salmon in Europe. Across the pond in the US, these are some of the price charts that we observe now. This is the first picture is the index. This is all the different salmon products. It's dropping quite sharply. The main driver of the drop is the whole fish. This is the product that really goes into food service, and you can see it on the right side, especially the large whole fish dropping pretty strongly, more than 50% loss in value, but from a high point. The product that's very important for the Chilean industry and is a very high value product is the fillet. And you notice in the corner that this is the product that maintained its price for quite some time, around $5 per pound, and then really dropped only starting around April. And if you see this on a longer time period, it's definitely an important drop, but it's not as bad yet as it was in 2016 and back in 2013 when the industry made pretty significant losses. So this is a challenging time for the Chilean industry, but they've seen worse, and I think they'll be recovering fairly soon from this. The US retail picture, this is data that Erna Berry collects, and they have noticed that at retail point already the prices for salmon are falling, so some 43 cents on average lower in the US. And I think this, together with some of the issues of the meat industry and the importance of people cooking at home these days, should really drive the salmon consumption. So overall, I would say so far this should be roughly the bottom of the salmon industry. I don't think that there will be much more reductions in price and in demand. We've basically reached bottom. The way up is going to be perhaps something difficult to forecast. One of the things that you can look at are, luckily in salmon, we have futures prices. So what you're seeing now is 3 snapshots of the futures price back in February, March, and April. And what you see, of course, that it shifted down. That's normal when you have a decline in price. The environment is weaker demand, so the price shifted down. But interestingly enough is to see that there is a expected increase somewhere around mid to end 2020. The price comes back. It's not as high as the previous, let's say, old price, but it's significant. It's back to 60 NOK. And that's what at least this fairly thinly, I have to say, fairly thinly traded product is indicating. Today, I downloaded the most recent contract prices, and it looks like there is a contract for Q1 and Q2 of 2020 already for 61 NOK. It is assuming, though, a very weak euro NOK relationship, which of course boosts this number. So in the salmon sector, I would say if this is any guidance in some of the things that people have told us in the industry, the increasing demand from retail, the bottoming out of the loss in demand at food service, this could be a realistic scenario. It will still be a difficult year, nevertheless, but at least we have a recovery in sight. So that's, I guess, so far for me talking about the salmon industry. Let's get into the shrimp for the second half of the presentation. So shrimp is a totally different sector than salmon. It's an industry that had a very difficult period even before the corona came up. This is a long-term price figure, and you see the shrimp prices really coming down since that crisis we had back in January 2014, when we had a major supply shortage due to the EMS disease. Frankly, since then, the sector has been growing, recovering, and 2019 was a particularly strong year of growth of supply, and prices came down. The next slide shows you what people thought the shrimp supply would look like back in November 2019 and back in January 2020, so just before Corona. In fact, I was presenting at the Gold Conference, and remember in India there was a lot of optimism back then. People said India could grow by 7%, Ecuador by 9%, Vietnam by 13%. A couple of months later, I believe the NFI was in Miami in January. I didn't go there, but again, optimism, 6% for the major producers. Only Indonesia switched to somewhat negative territory. So the sector was gearing up for big supply, and it doesn't look good when you're gearing up for big supply and suddenly, the demand just disappears. So what can we see happen these days? Similarly to salmon, a major drop in demand, particularly coming from the food service sector. But in here, it happened first in China. In salmon, China is not so important, but in shrimp, it's very important. Not only that, the corona happened during the Lunar New Year. This is the high point in consumption. So all that product that was supposed to go to China then went to the US and Europe, only to find that there the demand had disappeared. So the demand loss was quite severe, and it's now recovering, but slowly. On the supply side, I would say that we're hearing more significant interruptions than we had in the salmon industry. We're seeing hatchery. Initially, certainly, there were lockdowns in countries like India, where hatcheries and feed companies could not bring the product to the farms. Farmers could not export their product because port facilities were under lockdown. And there was even absenteeism. So I'll go through some of these issues a little bit in more detail on a per country basis, because they're all very different. But certainly major supply side disruption, a lot more than in salmon. The bottom line is, I think that this sector is going from just about break even to considerable losses at farm level. Farmers will be hurt and they will lose money, and there will be and unlike salmon, this sector can change its supply. So seeding rates, production will come down. I don't know how much exactly, we'll talk about it perhaps later, but there will be a supply reaction here. So a negative supply is coming, particularly in the summer. So let's go through some of these slides and some of these details that I mentioned. This is US import data in January and February. And like I said, when there was no Chinese demand, all the major exporters really focused on the US. And look at these numbers, double-digit growth. India, 30% growth. Indonesia, 25%. Ecuador, 53% growth. This is them sending shrimp to the US because China is not buying. But this shrimp obviously is not being consumed now. And this is the result in the price. So we already had a fairly low price point in 2019. That's the blue line. And look what happened in 2020, just sliding down to almost a record low point. This is the US Farm Shrimp Index from a buyer perspective. So there are many products here. The next slide go on country by country. And one of the things that this is Ecuador. This is one of the major producers, second producer after India. And they are the first to get hit because they supply China primarily. 68% of their export go to China. So already in January, they had this major drop in price. Then there was a slight hope that, okay, maybe the Americans and the Europeans will buy this. But then the reality hit, and it was clear that there was no one going to be buying this product, and the volumes were big. They were coming forward with the plan that they had to grow. So the price really crashed. It's I would say it's almost a 50% price, and now we're seeing some improvement. Finally, the Chinese market is coming back. Actually, I found it really amazing to see some of these Ecuadorian export numbers. This is the Q1 exports of Ecuador, and they actually had 17% more volume they delivered. Only in March that they really started to decline. So bringing more product to a market that has less demand is basically the result, what you saw in that price figure. You know, you get 50% less for your shrimp now. Very challenging situation for the exporters. I'll quickly run through some of the other countries. So this is India. Somewhat of a less sharp price decline because they're more exposed to the US, so they didn't get that initial hit going to China. And quite quickly, the government introduced a minimum price guarantee, which put a floor to really safeguard all those smallholder farmers in India who were about to lose their livelihoods. So there was this guarantee. It's now effective until March 18th. It was, in fact, prolonged a couple of times. But now we hear that India is starting now to export again, and the farmers are now back into their fields, and they're bringing in new seeds. So it's starting to recover. But this was a very painful moment. And still the prices are probably at or below cost. Here comes the next one is Vietnam. If you remember, I mentioned earlier on, Vietnam was very bullish before Corona, and they had this price that was going up was the reason for their bullishness. But then again, that twofold decline. First, China not buying, and then Vietnam realizing that the United States and Europe are also not buying. So then a second correction. In Vietnam, however, we've seen a healthy recovery because the Chinese have opened their market, and this is the first country where they've bought shrimp, and you see it's coming back up again. However, it's still a very low price, and we do hear that the farmers are doing well and they're seeding now back to normal, but I wonder how much they can recover at this price point. In the past, when we had a similar price point, they did not seed fully. So let's see how much the effect of this will be for them. The final country that I want to talk about too is Indonesia. Now that was a country already had issues with disease. And when the Corona came, not only did the US market, which they depend very heavily on, was shut, but also the strong domestic market, something like 35% of their market, of their sales are to the domestic, let's say, food service sector. Both of them were shut. So a very sharp decline. And also, luckily, now we see the first couple of weeks, already 2 weeks of recovery. But this is certainly not a price point that will allow the industry to recover the volumes of the past. So again, let's see what the total impact will be. So let's say if I'm trying to conclude here our view of the sector. The shrimp industry clearly is hurt quite heavily. The supply side was hurt strongly, but maybe that's recovering. The demand side is not yet recovered. I took this slide from a presentation from the NFI, whereby they interviewed people asking them, when will you resume some activities when the lockdown is lifted? And an important one is going to a restaurant. This is very important for shrimp consumption. And it says, according to this survey, that what I found important was that 41% of people said that it will take them 1 to 5 months to go back to a restaurant again. And 20% even said more than 6 months. That's concerning. I would say that means that we're going to have a severely depressed demand curve for the rest of this year, which means if supply from the shrimp side is anywhere close to what it was last year, we will still have the low price. Some of the speculation in the market is that perhaps the supply will be even reacting so much to the current low point that at some point they will need to have a shortage. So I guess that's the only point I will leave this presentation. It's high uncertainty, both on the supply side and on the demand side. And this is certainly a very unsettled market that we're going in and uncharted territories. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting.
Jorjan, thank you so much for that interesting perspective. Certainly presents a tough picture from a price perspective, but good to see some recovery happening in some markets. So again, Jorjan, George, thank you so much for those presentations. I know our attendees appreciate you sharing your insights with us, as do I. So now is a time in our presentation that we'd like to ask a few polling questions. We are going to take a short pause because we'd like to hear from you. In any good relationship, it's important to have a give and take. So we like to listen and we like to receive some feedback. So we put together a few polling questions for our international guests to gather thoughts on the U.S. soy industry and aquaculture. Later in the program, we're going to share the results of these. And following the questions, we're going to take a short break. We'll take about a 5-minute break. We are eager to hear your opinions, so please do give us the answers to the polling questions before you go on break. So now it's time for our first question. It should be popping up on the screen momentarily. I'll give you a little preview. The question is, how long will it take for markets for aquaculture products to rebound to previous levels? 3 to 5 years, 1 to 2 years, less than a year, and we don't know. At least on my screen, I am not seeing the polling question pop up. So I'm not sure if we're having a technical problem. Okay, this is the second polling question. So let's go to the second question. Best aquacultural practices, BAP certification plus soy sustainability assurance protocol. Will they be necessary for marketing aquaculture products in the future? A, strongly agree, B, agree, C, neutral, and D, disagree. Okay, the next question, please. What will be different about global aquaculture in the coming years? A, innovative, high-quality, sustainably sourced feeds. B, new, innovative production technologies. C, less disease, less mortality. D, greater stewardship of clean water. E, new products, new species, new market opportunities. Or F, none of the above. So there's a lot to think about there on that slide. Okay, and as I said, we're going to be sharing the results of these after our Q&A session. So stay tuned to get the insights of all of the people that are participating in the program today. So thank you for your answers. We are now going to pause for a short break. It is 54 after the hour right now, so we are going to plan to start again at 59 after the hour. And in the meantime, we're going to show a brief video on the screen, but this is your break time. So if you need to stretch your legs, go get another cup of coffee or whatever it is, cup of tea, feel free to do so. This is your break. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
feed.
Welcome back. Hope you were able to enjoy your break. And if you watched that video, it's always interesting to see how the IPRS system works. So now I would like to introduce our next speaker. This is Carlos Salinas, Senior Director of U.S. Soybean Meal for USSEC. Go ahead, Carlos.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to be here with you and listen to great speakers, and I look forward to our Q&A session. My name is Carlos Salinas, and I'm USSEC's Senior Director for Soybean Meal, with responsibilities over animal and aquaculture programs. COVID-19 is changing the way we do things and will likely have many foreseeable and unforeseeable consequences. Some countries have entered this pandemic better prepared than others, but unfortunately, there are no winners when lives are lost. Our thoughts and prayers are with the less fortunate. I'm one of the newest additions to USSEC's team. My work experience has been mainly focused on grain and oilseed processing for the past 25 years, with work experience at Continental Grain Company, ADM, and Bunge. I am honored to be a team member at USSEC and to use my experience for the benefit of our stakeholders. I have lived and experienced agriculture from the perspective of the major producing areas around the world to key destination markets. I have experienced many geographies. The complex grain and oilseed supply chain is dynamic, with many risks associated in the process. Much of our success and failure of the major players in the industry has depended on good management practices. This is crucial at times when of volatility. Risk management and attention to detail always matters. As I try to gain better understanding of aquaculture, I begin to uncover a supply chain that is exponentially more complex than what I previously imagined. It has no price hedging mechanism. There is no futures exchange platform where buyers and sellers can manage the risk. The price risk exposure is significant. The flows are many times difficult to understand. The varieties of species involved far exceed the poultry, swine, and cattle world I've been used to. The amount of variability of ingredients is complex and changes significantly by region. The feed conversion ratios of fish just do not compare to terrestrial animals. The areas of production cover a much wider geography, and trying to find data is much more difficult compared to an Oil World annual report or USDA supply-demand report. While there are many differences, the need for protein and energy is one of the many common threads. The need of a sustainable, consistent quality supply of protein and energy are crucial in any formulation. I have spent over half of my career between North America and South America. While I was not born in the grain business, I have seen soybeans being harvested, dried, stored, shipped, processed, and consumed at different origins and destinations. Yes, the process varies by region. Preserving the protein content of soybeans is not an easy task. In many instances, the value chain or local climatic conditions can destroy the main reason the soybean was grown for. High moisture content at harvest, high temperatures, or high relative humidity, poor drying system, poor storage, and handling can damage the soybean. The U.S. soybean producing regions have a natural climatic advantage. These natural benefits, coupled with good and sustainable management practices, help preserve the valuable protein, oil, and energy within the soybean. Crushers also play an important role as they convert these soybeans to meal and oil. Inconsistent quality can have many consequences to the supply chain. And while the trade does not really measure digestibility of protein in their transactions, end users well know the impacts of soybean meal produced from soybeans that have higher heat damage. The U.S. major growing regions are blessed by their geographies. Just look at the northern plains. Beans are generally harvested with low moisture content at almost freezing temperatures and stored in a natural freezer for the winter. The good quality is well preserved. The quick shipment to the PNW and proximity to Asia give the buyers a shorter lead time to fill demand gaps. The reliability and consistency in quality allow buyers to reduce the safety margin required compared to other origins. Sustainability is another common thread among different segments. It is a key element to consider for buyers and sellers. Buyers around the world recognize the sustainable attributes of U.S. soy and that our farmers exemplify sustainability. Just ask any U.S. farmer. They will tell you their families have farmed the same land for generations. Ask your supplier to provide you with sustainable U.S. soy grown following our Sustainable Soy Assurance Protocol guidelines. Ensuring the full chain is sustainable and certified is the right thing to do. The Sustainable Soy Assurance Protocol is already accepted as a certified source within the best aquaculture practices feed mill standard. BAP certified feed mills have been given time to ramp up to this, and by June of 2022, BAP certified feed mills will require at least 50% of all soy and soy meal ingredients to be derived from certified sources. This is the direction which our industry needs to move. We applaud feed mills for taking these steps and are happy we can provide volume supply of these sustainable ingredients for aquafeeds. Proper certification to sell final products into major markets will increasingly encourage or even enforce Sustainable Soy Assurance Protocol certification. The technological progress on aquaculture and sustainability are an example to follow. I have lived in Brazil and the U.S. during some of the greatest expansion windows in our industry. The industry cannot afford to have a short-sighted vision on sustainability. As many of you know, our stakeholders today are counting on us to deliver on our word. Having the paper to prove your sustainable efforts is good, but actual results is what our society demands. USSEC and many buyers around the world have recognized the positive attributes of U.S. soy and the benefit it brings to the value chain. This happened way before my time. Publications have demonstrated the benefits of U.S. soy, but we know of studies that will soon be published that reinforce the superior quality attributes. We're working closely with different companies that are helping us with data analytics to better educate our buyers about these benefits. We're also working on deploying a tool that can help our customers, based on the ingredients available in their regions, give a proper value to U.S. soy, considering its preferential amino acid profile, energy content, and digestibility. As our chairman, Monty Peterson, noted, when you're buying U.S. soybeans, you're buying many things. You're buying quality, consistency, sustainability, and a group of experienced professionals willing to assist you in every step of the way. Once again, I would like to thank you for your participation and look forward to visit with you soon after travel restrictions are lifted.
Well, thank you to all of our speakers today for their insights. Thank you, Carlos. We would now like to welcome back George and Horion, the speakers you heard from earlier, for a question and answer session. They're here today with us to answer any questions you may have about the presentations from today or aquaculture. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask questions, please use the Q&A widget located in the lower part of your screen. Make sure your questions are submitted in that Q&A widget versus the chat widget so we can monitor that and make sure we get the questions addressed. So we now welcome your questions. Please type them in, and I know many have been coming in while we're doing this. Now, a couple things I'd like to address because I've seen several questions on this. One of those questions is, will the presentations be available? Yes, we will give you information later on how you can get a copy of the whole webinar that we are doing today. So that will be available to you. Secondly, there's been several questions about the impact of COVID-19 on the planting of the U.S. soybean crop. Will it negatively impact that? And as Monty mentioned this morning, our farmers are going to the field and are getting the crop planted. You may have seen some recent USDA statistics that we're getting pretty quick planting progress being made. So I think at least our crop is starting out in good condition. You know, our farmers naturally social distance, and farming has been considered to be an essential activity. So there is no restriction on our farmers getting the crop planted. So soybean crop is looking in good shape so far, very early in the growing season, but so far it looks like it is in good shape. So now let me start out with a question, and I'm going to ask this to both George and Korjan. So first we'll let George answer, and then Korjan. And the question, and I've seen several of these questions, and I'm trying to kind of put them together so we get as many people having their questions answered as possible. So what is the key change we expect to see in consumer behavior after the restrictions ease? Will people be eating more seafood, focusing more on sustainability, an increased desire for easy meal assembly kits? What does your expertise tell you? And lastly, the last part of this question that I'm tying with it, is there any indication that seafood could be a food for health related to the COVID-19? So please, George, if you could give us your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think there are several ways to view this. One is a lot of consumers in the U.S. anyway, and around the world who are affected by unemployment have very tight budgets. So I think we can expect to see tightening of the belt and a preference for seafood that's a little cheaper, you know, going for a notch down, less, for example, lobster, more of the, nutritious but lower cost seafood items. In terms of, the huge change has been the shift to greater e-commerce and to retail delivery. And I see that as something that is never quite going to go back to the way it was. We're seeing a metamorphosis, and that's a great thing. And consumers are learning to cook more seafood at home. I believe around the world, as these restrictions are relaxing, we're seeing the food service sector beginning to recover. But I agree with Gorian and with other experts we've spoken to that this is going to take time. It's basically we're dealing with fear. People are concerned. This is a very serious disease, and they're going to be very cautious about returning, which is as it should be. But we're already seeing orders from food service companies who supply the restaurant trade beginning, and the big shift, the big return is already starting. I'll turn it over to Gorian then.
Great, thanks, George. Gorian?
Thank you, George. Well, I completely agree with what George said, of course, and I'll try and build on it. Of course, you have the down trading. That's definitely what we expect, and the lower value species will benefit. There's also this switch of channel from the food service to food retail and online, which is likely to be quite a long-lasting and almost permanent switch. But it's one thing to say it will happen, and the second is to think, okay, well, how is it actually going to work out? Because we need to have somewhat different products. We need to have different processing. We need to have different delivery system. I've even heard of people speaking, well, can we bring the luxury of the restaurant experience somehow more at home in a more convenient way. Can that also happen? So you might, of course, you have the down trading and you'll see that, but at the same time, at retail level, you might also see other products that perhaps had only had a market at food service that are now suddenly positioned at a food retail point. And I mean, I just have to reiterate this online trading, how we've really moved 10 years ahead now. I can definitely say that senior people, and I know I can have at home, I can see people that have never ordered online are now comfortable to order online. And this is something that will stay for a while with us, and it will definitely impact how we consume fish, what species we consume. And maybe to close on this point, when people order online, they don't necessarily buy the same things that they buy when they go to a wet market. There's an important concept of trust. If you're going to the wet market, or you can see the freshness, you need to trust the supply.
Well, we seem to have lost Koyan's audio temporarily. Let me move on to the next question. So, George, here's a question.
Jim, before you do, may I just jump
in aquaculture due to this pandemic? Meaning, will people pay closer attention to really doing it correctly as they are raising fish, or will they perhaps ignoring these lessons of COVID-19 and try to take the lowest cost approach to producing fish, given the low price we are seeing for fish? What's your opinion on that, please?
Yes, I do think that there will be some shifts. I think producers will be watching the situation very carefully, and we're already hearing that many are reducing stocking densities, which hedges their bets, reduces their cost. But I don't think there will be intentional corner cutting in terms of biosecurity. But I do believe it could be sort of an almost unavoidable after effect in some cases. For example, in the case of those who are having trouble getting SPFs, specific pathogen-free broodstock, shipped in from international sources, especially from shrimp from Hawaii, because of air freight logistics restrictions, those deliveries have been limited, and some hatcheries are shifting to pond-raised broodstock that carry disease. And we're hearing about greater outbreaks in China. I think these tend to be linked. So there may be not a question of cutting corners, but I think there could be some short-term issues related to health control because of air freight. In the longer term, I think that this may spur the transformation to more efficient production systems. As Gorian mentioned, in a scenario where we see lower prices, this will drive us toward low-cost production systems. So which production systems are the most efficient and the lowest risk? And in some cases, that can be the low end of the intensity range. There may be some very traditional farms stocking very, very low densities. And in some cases, it may be much more intensive systems that have better disinfection routines, recirculation, better controls. And I tend to think the latter system is going to benefit from this this scenario, which will favor the low-cost producers.
Okay, great insights there. Thank you for that. And that, I'm sure, is interesting for most of the people in participating. Okay, Gorian, welcome back. Here is a question for you. The future potential for investment in aquaculture. Will banks and investors, how will they view the aquaculture industry in light of the COVID-19 situation and the impact we've just recently seen on prices? what do you foresee for investment opportunities and financing opportunities over the next year?
Well, first I have to say that financing and investment opportunities have a much longer horizon than 1 year, right? So you would typically look at a sector over a longer period of time. We in Rabobank, and I think other major agricultural lenders have long time identified aquaculture as a very important industry. An industry that, as George said earlier, is both providing a very good protein, very healthy protein, but at the same time, a protein that has a low environmental footprint. So aquaculture is really part of the solution. This is one of the key reasons why we've really put a lot of resources into understanding this sector and backing the industry. The challenges are, however, that this still remains a sector that is fragmented, volatile, as we saw with the prices, often difficult to understand due to sometimes lack of data, and certainly more risky. And what we're seeing now with Corona, frankly, is a continuation of that. I mean, we've had crises before, and even not so long ago. We often, usually in aquaculture, we talk about that. We say demand is usually not the problem; it's the supply. And now, for the first time, we have that actually demand ends up being also a source of volatility. So I don't think that we're going to see less investment. We'll probably see some movement towards less risk, and perhaps some of those that are more diversified, larger and better placed producers will find capital easier.
Okay, very good. I'm sure that is on people's minds as they think about their businesses and think about how to grow or how to change their aquaculture business. Here's a question for George. After COVID-19, and I guess we're all hoping that there will be an after coming soon, do you believe that seafood inspection and certification programs will become more important? And the question asks about the US and the EU, but I would broaden that to a worldwide basis. So what's your opinion on that, George?
I think that, food safety will always be a major concern, and there have to be verification systems. And so I don't see that going away. I think, if anything, food safety needs to originate not at the end of the pipe where the product dumps into the market, but all the way back to the originating processing plant, the farm, the feed mill, the hatchery. And that's really the point of BAP certification, is to try to work on the whole supply chain and make sure that food safety is built in from the beginning. I think if you talk to anyone in the seafood industry, food safety is a given, absolute given. It's an expectation, and it's probably the number one issue. It falls at a higher priority than environmental issues. So I think, and going beyond food safety to the sustainability issues, I think we all realize that sustainability is here to stay. There might have been those 30 years ago who would have said this is a fad, this is going to go away. But as the population becomes more and more dense, and we recognize shortages of resources and climate change, sustainability is becoming more and more mainstream. It's part of almost every major retailer's corporate social responsibility platform. So I think certification is going to become absolutely more important as we go down the road. And certification criteria will become more and more stringent as well.
Great. Something for some important information for people to be considering as they're producing aquaculture. Okay, here's a question that I'd like both of you to take a stab at addressing. And Horian, let's start with you. And it's really sort of a two-part question. I'm tying a few questions here together. So how do you foresee the impact of this epidemic on the the mix in the marketplace between marine seafood and aquaculture produced seafood in terms of the demand? Will there be a shift in that? Will people focus more or less on one or the other? And the second part of that is, do you foresee a significant proportion of plant-based foods, including plant-based seafood, in the future? Is that something that you see coming at all? So I know those two, I don't know how closely related those two are, but I wanted to try and tie those two together. So Florian, please, you go first, and we'll go to George. Question. Thank you.
Yeah, interesting questions. When it comes to the dynamics that drive aquaculture and wild catch, I think to a large extent these are separate dynamics. Wild catch is an industry that's limited by quota, and to a certain extent they're not very responsive to prices or to demand. I think that sector, we've seen species where even when prices or demand fell, they found another operator or another market. At the end of the day, they will catch them. If they have to make fish meal, they'll do that. So the production of wild catch, I don't think is very responsive to demand. It's just a supply irresponsive industry, inelastic as we call it. Aquaculture, on the other hand, is the growth factor. It's where demand has to come from. I don't know for sure whether COVID-19 has any real long-term effects on the growth trajectory of aquaculture. There are more important things like genetics, people focusing on their health and other developments that are far more important. There could be some focus of more local consumption, and with some technologies, such as recirculating aquaculture systems, we can think of some benefits to these technologies due to governments perhaps focusing on shorter supply chains and looking for internal demand. I'll switch to the other question briefly, which is about plant-based seafoods. And this is a really interesting one. In fact, I listened to a webinar just last week about this, and it's arriving in the meat sector, but I think it's more difficult for this product to develop in seafood. Firstly, because we have so many species, and it's quite costly to develop these products. Secondly, so that's on the supply side, but on the demand side, I'm not sure that people that buy seafood are necessarily looking for an alternative that is plant-based. They tend to buy seafood because it is seafood, because it's wild or farmed, because it's healthy. It's up to the plant-based alternative suppliers to position that product in a fair and a good way, whereby they will be seen as a healthy alternative. I don't know if they will be. So from my side, the jury is still out whether or not plant-based seafoods will at some point be important. They might be a niche for a while, but whether they will have the same trajectory as we've seen in meat, I really don't know that yet. It is way too early to speculate. So I'll leave it to George. I'll pass the ball to George.
Okay, thank you, Florian. George, could you give your opinion on those questions, please?
Thank you, Jim. I just love teaming up with Gorian. Gorian, can we do this more often? You're my favorite across the ocean friend. When it comes to the marine and the aquaculture, I think, Jim, one of the issues is whether it's a high value fish that's targeted toward fresh sales at the food service level. And I think that has been one of the big issues with many of the marine capture fisheries, is with the downturn in air freight and the closure of food service sales. Those marine harvests of very high value fish have nowhere to go. And it has also affected the aquaculture side to some extent. We talked about the sea bass and sea bream in the Mediterranean, especially Greece and Turkey. where those products would have gone to food service sales fresh. And, they have the double whammy of the logistics issue of shipping fresh and then the food service markets being down. And it's very hard to shift. These, you would think that these fishermen, these vessels, they could just sell their product at retail, but they're not packaged right. They're not delivered in the right form. The retail customers aren't accustomed to that. There's basically a misalignment of the market and the producer. And then going over to the plant-based seafood, I'm biased, but I tend to think that those who eat seafood really have a preference for all of the attributes, not just the taste, but also the texture and the smell. I mean, there are many seafood consumers who prefer fresh over frozen because the texture is a little bit different. And then we can look also at analogs, seafood analogs made from surimi, which have been around for 30 years, the artificial crab legs. Those just really have never taken off because they're sensed as not the real thing, even though they are made from seafood. They're made from pollock or other marine fish, but their consumers don't accept them as well as they do the real thing. So I think we have a great future in aquaculture production and seafood in general.
Okay, very good. Folks, I think we are so lucky to have the insights of these two global experts in aquaculture. So we're very fortunate. So that's the good news. The bad news is we're kind of running out of time for our Q&A session. So I'm going to ask one more question of each of our participants. I'm going to ask them to kind of make this a lightning round type question where we answer it fairly quickly. And I know there are more questions that we didn't get to. I know that our team will be trying to follow up with many of you that have asked questions, and we will get some of those. We'll ask them of our experts and try and get some of their information and give you feedback. But I hope that the way we've amalgamated some of these questions you find helpful. So the last question I would like to ask is what, and this is sort of a broad question. We'll start with Corian. But what are the good things that you see coming out of COVID-19? I'm always I'm a glass half full sort of person, meaning I try to look for the good things in any situation. So if we tried to look at that for now, COVID-19 and its impact on the global aquaculture industry, what would you see that the good things are that people should be thinking about as they go away from this conference? So first we'll go to Corian, and then we'll go to George, and we'll wrap up after this question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just name one then, since it's a lightning round. I think one important point is that people are cooking seafood at home much more than they have before. Many of the industries have been trying to educate people to be comfortable at home, to know how to do it, not to be scared to overcook it or to be afraid of bones. We had some data that in the US, over 50% of customers who bought salmon in the last couple of months have never bought it at home. So this is an encouraging sign. Perhaps when the food service comes back, we might actually end up on a higher demand curve as a total, as more people will be comfortable cooking it also at home.
Ah, very good.
Let me jump in. I want to just touch on that market side, and I hope that one of the lessons that's learned from this is the need for a more unified seafood marketing program, not just in the U.S., but globally. I think we have this problem of production and marketing not being well aligned, and this could be a catalyst for us to work together more fully and more productively in the future. On the production side, I think one of the benefits of this is the tremendous surge in technology that has come with the diagnostic field. We hear about rapid diagnostics in 15 minutes getting a result, and this is from a protein receptor kind of technology, and also vaccine technologies, the new messenger RNA vaccines. So I think since disease is such a major issue in aquaculture. Having these advancements that will ultimately boil over into aquaculture will really help us.
Great. Well, I think that's a great way to finish up with a little bit of optimistic news and some things to look forward to coming out of this difficult situation that we find ourselves in. So I'd like to thank both George and Jorian for your being with us here today, for your taking the questions. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience who asked so many great questions. Again, I apologize we weren't able to get to all of them, but we're trying to keep more or less on schedule here because I know everybody else has other things to do today or this evening. So thank you. Thank you very much, George and Jorian. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to reveal the answers, the thoughts you provided in the polling questions we asked earlier. So first question was, how long will it take for markets for aquaculture products to rebound to previous levels? 1 to 2 years seems to be where most of the people, that's where 60% of the people responded. And I think that sounds pretty consistent with what we heard from our experts. I know we're all optimists and we hope it will be sooner than that, but that's the answer that we came up with. Second question was on the BAP and the SSAP. Will they be necessary for marketing aquaculture products in the future? 78% of the people either agreed or strongly agreed. So I think this is something that certainly seems to be, and as we heard from our global experts, it's something that they think will also be more important in the future. So good. Let's move on to the third polling question. What will be different about global aquaculture in the coming years? The two top answer getters were the innovative, high-quality, sustainably sourced feeds and the new innovative production technologies. And then there were a few other questions, or a few other answers marked as well. So it was quite a mix. But certainly, I think only 1% said none of the above. So certainly, we hit on those there, I think. Well, let me just wrap up our session today. It's gone very quickly, and thank you for your participation. Thank you for all your questions, and again, for our speakers being here. We do hope that their insights and answers were helpful to all of you. I hope the program was beneficial. On behalf of myself, the U.S. Soy family, and the other speakers, I want to say thank you for taking time to participate in the event today. We hope that after hearing from our speakers, you have a better understanding of how this pandemic is impacting our collective interests in aquaculture. As we move further into 2020 and the years ahead, we're very excited to continue to meet and collaborate in new and exciting ways. U.S. soy and the U.S. industry and global industries are still open for business. And our commitment is to continue adapting to the environment and to make sure we're moving forward and serving all of our global stakeholders as best we can and as you expect. We appreciate, again, you taking time out of your day to spend it with us. We are sincerely grateful for the partnerships that we have with many of you around the world. We've built those over many years, and we want to continue working in those in the years to come. Our entire U.S. Soy family extends our thoughts to all of you. We know that these are challenging times that you're all navigating through with much uncertainty for ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities. We hope that you're staying safe and healthy. We're going to make today's presentations available as a recording. As I said, I know some of you maybe have had some technical difficulties or haven't been able to be here for the whole thing, but we will make it available. And I think it's been quite valuable with the information that our experts have provided. So please stay tuned for an email from your local USSEC representative for how to tap into this and how to get a copy of this. Also, one last thing I would like to ask of you. You're going to be getting a survey about the event. It's going to pop up on your screen just as soon as we conclude here in about a minute. We ask that you take just a few minutes right now and complete this survey. We do truly look forward to hearing from you, from your thoughts, so we can make these events better in the future. So thank you again for your time. Stay safe. Stay steadfast in your work in the global aquaculture industry. It's an interesting business. And I think you heard about the potential good things in the future, so stay optimistic. I truly look forward to connecting with all of you in the future in a different way, in a more personal way, but thanks for taking time to join us in this virtual way today.